My name is Tammy, and two words I would use to describe myself as a student are heavy intellect.
Welcome to Gym Shorts, a podcast from Ophea. We're a Canadian charity that prioritizes student health, well-being, and belonging in classrooms, schools, and communities. For over 100 years, we've been working to make gym class every student's favorite part of their day. Through this podcast, we explore the powerful and personal stories behind our earliest experiences with health and physical education. In each episode, we speak with guests about experiences from school that shape their future relationship with physical activity and well-being. These stories offer honest reflections on how our past informs the present and how we can all work together to create happier, healthier, and more inclusive futures for all students. Now, let's get into today's story. Hi, I'm Andrea Hayfley, and I'm a health and physical education curriculum consultant at Ophea. As you may know, episodes of the Gym Shorts podcast will be hosted by me or Tammy, Ophea's Chief Strategy Officer. Since we will be speaking to many different individuals about their experiences in health and physical education, we wanted to start out by sharing our own stories first. We're hoping this will give you a better sense of who we are and the role that gym class played in our own lives. Before we begin, a quick note. This episode may contain discussions about bullying or other negative school experiences that may be upsetting or triggering for some listeners. We encourage you to take care while listening and pause if you need to. With this in mind, let's begin today's conversation. Meet Tammy. As a student, she excelled in the classroom as a high achiever. But in the gym, the exact opposite was true.
So I used the words heavy intellect, and I'm going to lean into the heavy here. I was a really big kid. I was definitely clinically obese. And I was a really smart kid. So that's the intellect side of that description. I was an absolute nerd. I had the highest grades. I was the smartest kid in every subject area in school, except in phys ed. And phys ed class was my absolute living hell. And I was teased. I was bullied. I was ostracized. Nobody wanted to be my friend. And to add insult to injury, my mother was a teacher at my school. The kids who didn't like my mom as a teacher by proxy didn't like me, and vice versa.
While Tammy had grown accustomed to being top of her class, participating in Canada's fitness test served as a public reminder that when it came to physical education, she was a failure.
But the Canada Fitness Test was something that was introduced by the Government of Canada for all kids across Canada to complete on an annual basis. And we were measured against certain physical measures, like how fast we could run a mile, a certain number of push-ups, a certain number of sit-ups. I think there was a sit and reach and a standing long jump, all tasks essentially that were really difficult for someone in a body like mine to achieve. And then in front of your whole class, a couple weeks after you had completed the test, the Government of Canada was kind enough to ship badges to your teacher, who then distributed them in front of everybody. And so you were either excellent, gold, silver, bronze, or participation. So we can come back to what I achieved, but those were some tough moments for me.
Outside of school, Tammy was encouraged by her mom to pursue other forms of physical activity. This resulted in Tammy being signed up for dance classes, which unfortunately only magnified the challenges she was facing feeling comfortable in her own skin.
It was almost like a cruel joke, but my mom, in order, I guess, to keep my body moving, thought, you know what, Tammy needs to be in dance. So ballet, tap, and jazz were the things that I did almost every day of the week for like 13 years of my life. And my mother chose that for me because she perceived it to be a feminine way for me to be moving. But you can imagine a kid who struggles with obesity squeezing into leotards and tutus. It didn't feel good. It almost, I would say, shone a spotlight on the ways in which I didn't fit in.
Tammy's determination to fit in led her to dieting and other unhealthy habits. But as puberty further complicated things, it felt like nothing was working.
I would say that all of these failures, and because I was such a determined person and always trying to find the way to be better, led to some really unhealthy behaviors for me, including dieting at a really young age. I started my first diet, I was probably 8 years old. And then I dieted again repeatedly throughout my school-aged years as I grappled with puberty and other changes that were making it hard for me to keep a body that allowed me to move and look and feel a particular way.
Entering high school, Tammy became interested in joining a school sports team. However, this interest was less about physical activity, but more about finding a community.
Sports teams in high school were the first time I felt like maybe there was someone who was kind of like me. And the like me part was really the queer part. And so I desperately wanted to be around people who perhaps may have had some shared experience, because if you think back, like I never fit in these types of spaces.
With her good grades and drive to succeed, Tammy could have pursued education and employment in any field. However, she found herself drawn to working in the same physical activity space where she often felt like an outcast. The reason? To make sure her experience didn't become the norm for other kids struggling in the same way that she did at school.
So it was so completely defining for me that even though still in high school, I am still the kid who has the highest marks in every single subject area in my high school. My mother still has a wall full of every plaque and award I ever received. And I could have done anything in life. I could have gone to school for anything. But I chose to pursue an undergraduate degree in kinesiology, not because I wanted to study the science of kinesiology and understand anatomy and the body, but rather because I desperately needed to understand why people like me were always so ostracized and they didn't fit in. And so I needed the social science and the theories behind why these types of environments weren't working for certain people. And then I made it my mission in life to change that. And so here I am sitting in this seat at Ophea, where it's so self-actualizing for me to challenge provincial policies, to write proposals that articulate making the change in the world that I always wished I perhaps could have experienced.
Looking back on her experience in physical education, Tammy believes educators need to engage with all students by asking about their interests and personal goals, as well as challenging educators to rethink activities like dodgeball, where students like her felt especially vulnerable.
I would say that I wish that some of the caring adults around me would have asked me what I enjoyed. Because my earliest relationship to movement is in dance, which was imposed. It was because it was what I was supposed to do in order to sort of live into my femininity. And it sort of continued on from there, right? Like in phys ed class, I always had to move the way everybody else moved, even though I couldn't do that successfully. And so nobody ever asked me, and nobody ever paid attention. I was valued and celebrated and seen for being smart. And then the rest of me was backgrounded. I wish my PE classes weren't solely about whoever was the strongest or the fastest or the best, because I couldn't be any of those. And when I tried to shapeshift into that, it just became like a driver at goals. It was never fun. I didn't have fun in phys ed class. And I feel like if I think of an example that stands out in my mind, it's like I think about dodgeball. We played dodgeball all the time, and I was always the first kid out. And why? Because I couldn't move very fast, and I was the widest target. Like, it was almost cruel. And so why did we have to keep playing that? And why did I have to live through that repeatedly over and over again? Why didn't the teacher change the rules? Why didn't the teacher have us play a different game? Like, that was just never a possibility. I just really wish that some of those earlier experiences explored what the joy of movement could have been for me in a body like mine, just the way it was, not to have to change it. Because I think if that had been true, I think I would take way more risks now as an adult to try new things and to explore ways of moving that would bring me joy. But I think that was so not accessible to me in my earlier years that I'm too afraid to do that now.
Ultimately, Tammy still believes change is possible. In fact, she's seen it firsthand with educators who try to connect with all students in their classes and adapt their phys ed program as they go. This also includes recognizing unseen differences in students to become a trusting adult whose language and role modeling reflects a safe space for everyone to just be themselves.
As educators, to bring your curiosity and to value every kid who walks in your door, and to value the possibility to explore how they might be able to be successful in moving, as opposed to having a preset plan and this is the game or the thing that we're all going to do because I've decided that this is the thing that we're all going to do, and be awake to the kids who are obviously not having fun, or who are obviously the first ones out at every game, or who are obviously not being successful with the task that you've put forward. Maybe you are going to make mistakes as an educator, but be awake to those, and then be prepared to change course. Be open and curious and be prepared to change course. I think on the queer side of that equation, I would say talk about identities and relationships in ways that provide options and possibilities for everybody to exist. So when you're talking about healthy relationships in class, talk about all kinds of relationships. When you're talking about families, talk about all kinds of families. Open up space for the kid whose family you haven't seen yet and you don't know that they have two moms. And when you're talking about relationships and sexual identity and even and human development and sexual health, know that different kids have different bodies, have different desires, and are going to engage in different ways. And so be cautious and careful about how you may gender kids and how you may make assumptions about who they might be attracted to or interested in. Keep your language as open and as neutral as possible when you're talking about those things, because that one or two kids in your class who is so terrified of coming out, when you neutralize that language just for even a second, they think, maybe it's okay to be who I am. And maybe you're safe enough for me to talk to about it.
Creating a physically safe gym is important, but emotional safety matters just as much. The emotional safety considerations from OPAS, the Ontario Physical Activity Safety Standards in Education, help educators design environments where students feel supported, respected, and empowered. Help your students feel emotionally safe so they can fully engage, connect with others, and take healthy risks. Check the link in our show notes to explore the full resource. Tammy, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with movement from childhood through to elementary school, high school, and even till today. I love learning from you. You know, like I've known you for a few years now, and you're a very driven person. I wanted to ask if you can talk more about your experiences in phys ed and also with sport. Why were you so driven? Like, you clearly had negative experiences. You didn't feel good about who you were, who you are, as you are. Why did you care so much?
That's such a great question, and I feel like I could probably answer it 3 different ways. My hunch, though, like if I went at it so hard, is it was probably in some way tied to my survivability. Like it wasn't just like, oh, here's the last thing that I'm not great at and I need to be great at that thing. I had enough things that I was great at. But I think I was great at all of those things while hiding a core part of who I was, right? I wasn't out to my family. I was so successful and so celebrated for those academic successes that I needed to sort of stay on that train. I didn't want to disappoint, right? And when I think about what was maybe my eyes were opened to the possibility that there were maybe other people in a queer way that sort of felt like me on some sports teams, then that just like cracked open a little door that was like, maybe, just maybe, it's okay for me to be who I am, and I need to be around these people more to figure out like what that is and how I can be that. Like, what are the ways of being gay? Like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. Like your only window, like that was just a crack.
It was like it just cracked open a little bit, and I didn't know how thirsty I was for it. Yeah. But I needed to go there. It was like I had never had a sip of water in my life.
Yeah. Do you think your sport experience in high school would have been different if you hadn't been grappling with your identity?
I think probably. I think probably. I think it was. I think I would have just found a different niche, Andrea. I think I might have joined like the yearbook club or like something else to find like camaraderie with others. But I think my identity was wrapped up in that exploration 100%. Because otherwise, you know, and I think about most kids, like if it isn't self-actualizing and it's not helping you shape something that you need to shape at that moment in your life, and it's causing you harm, you're probably just going to go somewhere else. But it was the one place where I felt like I could maybe explore this thing, and I hadn't seen it anywhere else. Perhaps if the yearbook club teacher leader was gay, maybe I would have gone there. I don't know. But I think that for sure was a part of it.
I want to move into the work you do now here at Ophea. The work you do centers on working with teachers to reimagine health and phys ed in a variety of ways. Can you share what positive changes you see today versus when you were in school back in the day?
Well, thank goodness we don't have the fitness test anymore. So there's a start, right? Like I think I remember that the metrics on our report card in phys ed were tied to our ability to how well we could perform certain tasks. Like the Canada Fitness Test was
performative.
It was performative.
100%.
And so thank goodness that we don't necessarily evaluate kids in that way anymore. I think that automatically has to change the way a teacher teaches. With that said, there's a whole bunch of teachers out there who come from the same history and background that I did. So inevitably, and if they were successful in that, and many phys ed teachers were, they have a tendency to replicate that regardless of what they're being told to evaluate on a report card. I think the other thing that has changed that is wonderful is that I do think conversations that center difference are happening. They're happening all around us. And I think there are many opportunities that we bring into the gym now that we never did before. I even think our curriculum, as it structures things like teaching games for understanding over sport. Whether or not every teacher teaches that way is a different story. But I think we do have some guidance at some of the highest levels to create and open up different entry points for kids. And I think and hope, as I look at teacher candidates who are entering the profession, we are seeing more and more people who are not just white men teaching phys ed. I think that is a turning tide, and I think that's good. You talked about representation and being able to see yourself. I think an educator is part of that equation. If educators all look the same, there's only so far that'll take your practice. So I think the lived experience of the educator definitely matters. And the educator's role is to create the possibility of being. And when the educator does that well, then it opens up space for the rest of the students to truly authentically be who they are. So if an educator, for example, utilizes neutral language when they're talking about healthy relationships and identities, then all of a sudden students are using that language. And so bing, bing, bing. Oh, it's okay for you to be you. Maybe it's okay for me to be me. And then all of a sudden, the whole culture of the classroom shifts. And it's not, and it was actually not that difficult for the teacher to do. And they just sort of created this tidal wave of change.
Tammy, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your family and your daughter. and share a little bit about how you bring your parenting and advocacy into your home and what you hope to transfer for your own child when she goes into spaces such as a phys ed classroom, a physical activity space in school or outside of school.
It's such a great question, Andrea, and I would say it's so loaded, and perhaps as a parent as well, you can relate. But I would say when my kid is running a race, I am still the loudest parent cheering at the finish line, and I am still absolutely hoping that she's the one that crosses first. And I think I probably hope that for her even more than my wife, Denise, who has won all of the races in her life, would hope. Maybe because I've never had that feeling. So it's almost like she's an extension of me, and I'm like, I didn't win, and so maybe you can. But I hold that to be true at the same time that I hold it to be true that it's 100% okay, and often she doesn't win. Right? And I think I watch her move through life in ways where we're never successful 100% of the time, everywhere, all the time. And so I watch her grapple with, for example, wanting to play soccer at recess, but it's only boys who play soccer at recess. And here she is wearing her little dress and her tights, and she wants to play, but she wants to be with the girls. And then finally she does play. And she kind of gets bullied when she plays, and she gets knocked down, and she rips her tights, and she gets grass stains. But you know what? They let her play because she's really, really, really fast. So I try to talk to her about those experiences and what that felt like for her and how she can cope in those moments where she doesn't fit in, but she's trying to. And then we also have conversations about the moments where she is the best, right? And what is it like when you are feeling like you're at the top of your game? So I think about gymnastics, where she experiences like a high sense of mastery. And the way she embraces that, and I think she's learned that from her parents, is that she then becomes a teacher and a coach. And so she's looking for her friends who are trying to figure out something that maybe she's figured out. And she is gently trying to help them do it too. And that's all I could hope for, is like, you're finding ways to reach the people who are in the space who don't experience the sense of mastery that you do. And that's cool. I love that for you.
I think about that as a teacher too, right? That it's more than what we see from our role as a facilitator in our room, right? That Maya is attached to a family that's providing all these skills and strategies to be proud of who she is as she is, but also noticing that there are friends and peers in her class that she also needs to learn how to interact with, to be with, to understand that, hey, they're experiencing the same moment in time in a different way, and that she needs to also just learn how to be with people in her class, you know?
I think part of that is also like the language that we use as parents and educators around what success looks like. So I think sometimes we talk about it in the sense that, like, you're always on a team. And so we want you to imagine your classroom as like a team. And so maybe you understood the task and you completed it really quickly, and that's awesome. So now what are you doing to help the people around you? So that you can all get to that place where you feel like you've experienced some sort of success. And so the idea of success not being individual, but being collective is a powerful tool, I think, that we can think about. And we try to do that in our house.
Awesome. Thank you so much for opening up the doors into your lived experience through childhood and also through your schooling, but also even sharing your own experiences as a parent, as a mom, as an advocate. It was great chatting with you.
Likewise, Andrea. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
This episode was hosted by me, Andrea Hayflay, and was produced by Mike Meehan. Our music was written and performed by Ron Kelly. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. Your support helps us grow and reach more educators, students, and change makers. Until next time, let's keep moving questioning, and creating space for every student to thrive.